This is Daily Delivery Part 2. Hope you guys stuck around for this Wolves only, NBA only Part 2. I tried to listen to you guys. You guys gave me a lot of good feedback a few weeks ago when I asked for it, and a lot of you said, too much Wolves talk. I don't like all the Wolves talk. And then a lot of you also said, I love all the Wolves talk. I love Chris Hine. So how about a compromise right now with so much going on in Minnesota sports? I broke the podcast into 2 today and isolated the Timberwolves stuff. If you don't want it all, great. You don't have to have it. You can go listen to the part 1 about all the great stuff that happened to the Wild, what's going on with the Vikings and their voluntary workouts. The Twins just signed Pablo Lopez to a record contract, and Emma Bates of Elk River finished 5th in the Boston Marathon. There was so much going on Monday that I felt the need to break it into 2 parts, and I felt like the cleanest break was to take the Timberwolves portion out. So here is my interview with Chris Hine talking about the Wolves, their 109-80 loss on Sunday to Denver, and what can change in Game 2 on Wednesday. Let's bring in Chris Hine, Timberwolves beat writer, off of that Game 1. Debacle is maybe too strong of a word, Chris. I won't use that word, but they lost by 29 in the first game of the playoffs late Sunday in Denver. Now there's 2 off days before they play again on Wednesday. So I feel like there's a chance to get better, but let's talk first. I want to hear your perspectives. I already talked a little bit about this game with Royce on Monday, but you were in Denver. What was your take on what we saw and why we saw it?
Just overwhelmed, overmatched, not ready for the moment. You go around the locker room, and I feel like the Wolves didn't get a chance to really catch their breath from the week before, with all the travel and double play-in games that they had. They'll tell you that. I think they could use the 2-day break as opposed to a 1-day break. Rudy Gobert said his back was not great. So we'll see if he can get better in time for Game 2. Overall, the mood was not tragic. They seem to just kind of take it in stride. You have some veterans who have been in long series before. Conley, Gobert, Anderson. That was kind of their message, was we've been on both sides of this coin in playoff series before. We're not freaking out about it. But man, do things have to change before Game 2 if this is going to become a series. Everything, offense, everything was awful offensively, one of their worst offensive games of the season. And that led to very bad transition defense. It's all kind of connected. And the Nuggets, especially in that third quarter, just blitzed the Wolves off the floor.
They look like a team that had to work really hard just to get the 8th seed, which indeed they were, but they've been playing playoff kind of caliber games for 25 or 30 games this year because of the hole they put themselves in by not beating some of these lesser teams, and just because of the nature of the West this year. I don't think that's an excuse, but that's just what they looked like. They looked like a team that, like you said, could have used the extra rest, could have, like, the difference when you watched that game versus Denver, thinking, man, they could have had 4 or 5 days off and played Memphis had they taken care of business in that game against the Lakers, where they were up 15 in that first play-in game. That's a big difference. That feels like a real missed opportunity, and we thought so at the time. And then they beat Oklahoma City Friday, and you're like, okay, well, they're still in, not that big of a deal. But you could see the big deal was the opponent and how much time they would have had to actually prepare and rest and be ready for that game. So I think there was an element of that. I do think they can be better in this next game. I expect a much more professional effort, but that still doesn't excuse some of the things they could control in that game. I mean, they had a day of rest. They've been playing games, on this relative pace for the past, few months. This was not a surprise. It was a late game, so there was like a full 2 days between the Thunder game of 48 hours and when this started. It doesn't excuse what I thought was just a look from the beginning that they just weren't entirely into it in a way that the playoffs would suggest they should be.
No, they weren't. And, you could see it early on. I think the offense just was out of sync all night, forcing shots, guys trying to take it on themselves to do things. These are things that kind of show up early in the season.
Yeah.
Mike Conley talked a lot about, them needing to trust each other on offense, which is something that we hear often early in the season, not later in the season. Carl couldn't get a shot to fall, and I think some of the non-threes that he took were not necessarily the best shots that he could have taken last night. Ant still looks like he's trying to figure out how he's trying to find his way in this too big lineup, and how much traffic that tends to cause in the paint and where he fits in with this. Still trying to figure those things out. That if Carl wasn't hurt, maybe they get it ironed out earlier in the season, or maybe it doesn't work at all, because this too big thing maybe just isn't for the long term. We're going to learn a lot about that in this playoff series, considering this is one of the teams they're going to have to compete with for the next few years. Just how much they have to go, or how far they have to go, and can this be viable against one of the top teams in the Western Conference? And last night, the early returns were not great.
No.
Rudy Gobert struggling with his back injury. I think it's important to note that he's not the 100% version of himself physically out there right now. But Denver's going to take advantage of that. And you saw that last night and how much they wanted to get out and run.
Yeah, absolutely. And hurt or not, Gobert can be a liability when teams start to play fast, when they spread you out. We've just seen that in previous games, previous playoff series, things like that. So that's always going to be a question for them to kind of grapple with, and what's the most effective lineup. It's interesting. They're kind of in this mode where they still need a lot of information for the long term as to whether this too big lineup can work. And like you've said, a lot of the iterations that we've seen, no, they don't work great. That they're better defensively sometimes than they are offensively, but they haven't figured out consistently how to make teams pay, especially if they are undersized. There's some exceptions. I think obviously they did fine against Oklahoma City, a very small, inexperienced team. They scored 120 points. The defense was really good. That was a game where it worked, but against your higher caliber of teams where they can beat you in a lot of different ways. And oh, by the way, have the two-time MVP who kind of does a little bit of everything in the post. That's where they're going to struggle. So they're kind of in this space where they need a lot of information, but they also need to win games. And how do you kind of merge those two things, especially when you really have 7 healthy players that you really trust right now? Because I think in a series, in a perfect world, if they had Naz Reid and Jaden McDaniels, I don't think you'd see Jalen Noel right now. I don't know if you'd see much of Jordan McLaughlin. Like, those guys have had moments this season, but just not the same players they were before they got hurt this season and came back.
Yeah, and that's one of the issues they're facing right now, is that the rotation is so short that when Finch goes into the bench right now, he's grasping for straws at this point and hoping that somebody pops up and has a good game. Jordan McLaughlin has not looked himself the last couple of weeks here. Jalen Noel has been injured, most of the last 6-ish weeks or so. Trying to get back into a rhythm. I thought he gave them at least a little something, a little spark offensively at times last night. I'll be interested to see if he gets the call again on Wednesday night as one of the first people off the bench. It's interesting to kind of look at the offense right now and kind of the dynamic and push and pull that they have with this kind of pick and roll game with Conley and Rudy and maybe like Kyle Anderson and Rudy. But it also kind of flies in the face of like kind of the free flowing movement, freelance kind of style that Chris Finch prefers. And I think they have to kind of come up with a decision here. It's like, which way for this series do we want to play? Do we want to play more structured, more methodical, more gradual with, kind of screen and roll actions, which didn't look terrible at times last night? Or do we want to keep trying to play this free-flowing kind of structure? I think right now both things are kind of butting heads with each other, and you're getting what you saw last night against a Denver team that is not Oklahoma City and is not the Lakers defensively, at least last night they weren't. So I think the Wolves have some things they need to iron out and decisions they need to make in terms of offensive game plan heading into game 2.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake. With 24/7 gaming, the good times never have to end. And you can satisfy your cravings at our restaurants and bars. Or relax in one of our luxurious hotel rooms. Those that play together, stay together. And don't forget to join Club M so you can spark new memories and bask in the rewards along the way. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
I think one of the bigger concerns from this game was Towns, and we've seen this, periodically in big games, big moments. I think with the play-in game against the Clippers last year was one of them, and there was some up and down nature to his game in the Grizzlies series as well. He was very good against Oklahoma City, and he is still fairly fresh off of the 52 games he missed with the calf injury, but his relative no-show, both statistically and to some degree emotionally in that game, or the investment level that I saw from him just did not speak to me like a playoff game. That's got to be concerning as they think about the long-term future too, because here's a guy who's been here since 2015. This is 2023 now. That we shouldn't be having the same conversations about, is he going to show up or is he not going to show up for big games?
Yeah, I thought emotionally, I didn't mind his emotions last night because I think we've seen a version of Karl that can careen off the rails when things start to go south. So I didn't mind kind of how he navigated that game emotionally. He didn't get too worked up. And I thought that was actually an okay sign that he struggled. Things were going their way, and he still kind of kept his head in the game, because I thought there were times last postseason in the Clippers game, in the Memphis game, where he got so worked up emotionally, so invested in the refereeing or what have you, that he took himself out mentally in some of those games last season. So I thought last night was at least a step in the right direction, that on a tough night he didn't mentally check out. That being said, I thought he was trying to do a little bit too much at times. I thought the shot selection was not great. That goes for pretty much everybody.
Yeah.
Not just him. His 3-ball. I tend to think anytime Karl takes a semi-open 3, it is not a bad shot, considering he's like a 40% career 3-point shooter. Couldn't get those to fall last night. I'll be interested to see what happens on Wednesday night, because Finch tends to call the first couple of actions for players who might be struggling or players he wants to really get going in a particular game. So I wonder if it's going to be who's going to get that first call. Is it going to be a play for Karl? Is it going to be a play for Ant? Yeah, and I think that kind of might tell you what direction they want this offense to head. Is it going to be playing through Karl, or is it going to be playing through Ant? You got to play through both eventually, but which one do they feel they need to get going a little more? I would tend to favor Ant right now. I think they got to get him going, because if he gets going downhill, it's going to open up everything for everybody else. I don't know that Karl's going to open up the offense the same way that Ant would open up the offense if he was really a threat. So
yeah. And they seem to play with a certain joy or a certain kind of energy level when Ant is going, right? Like he's kind of an emotional kind of beacon for this team sometimes, in a good way, where if he's engaged, if he's happy with the way things are going, they feed off of his energy. And I'm not saying they don't feed off of Towns' energy, but I think it is more important to feed off of Ant's energy. And yeah, he does seem a little bit lost or stuck in the space of, hey, they're throwing a lot of double teams at him. They figured out that his shot's not falling a whole lot right now. So basically daring him to shoot. A lot of those shots are still contested. And when there's, they've got enough athletic, bigs, Jokic is not terribly athletic, but with guys like Gordon, guys like, Porter Jr., like guys who can affect his shot and guard him in a way that probably makes him uncomfortable. That to me is a big thing to get him going. That said, there was an element of Sunday night's game too that was just, they missed a lot of shots. I think Towns missed shots he normally makes. They had some open looks they don't normally miss. I don't think it was all shot making, but people do kind of half jokingly say it's a make or miss league, and they missed a lot of shots. And I don't know if that's tired legs, if it was just one of those games, but if they make a few more shots, this will be a more competitive game Wednesday.
It will. They just need to get better shot selection, I think. Mike Conley spoke to that, where it was, if he felt like guys were passing up some good shots to try to get some great ones, they weren't making simple plays that they needed to make. He felt fairly confident that there are ways that they could exploit this Nuggets defense, and Denver's defense did not light the world on fire during the regular season. They're a very efficient offensive team, but defensively they're not one of the elite. So they feel like there are ways that they can exploit this Denver defense. Conley just basically said they have to make the plays that were there. And they weren't doing that last night for whatever reason.
No, that's true. And I think I feel like there's a couple sequences, like the early third quarter sequence, where the game just completely got away from him. It was 11 at half. It was 11 at halftime, but you're thinking, okay, like if they can start the third quarter on a run, and third quarters have been a problem for them in a lot of these games this season. That's, I think they have a negative 4.4 rating in the third quarter. They're good in a lot of the other quarters, but where Towns tried to force a couple passes to Gobert, winds up as turnovers. There's another, I can't remember who was handling the ball, but somebody else tried to get the ball to Gobert, wound up as a turnover. Suddenly 11 is 18, is then 25, is then a blowout. That to me was kind of the uncertain nature of the offense, not quite sure how to attack, and still kind of this uneasiness with how this too big lineup works, where Cat's trying to make it work maybe too hard.
Yeah. And that was kind of the issue early in the season, where it felt like they were forcing things, and he was trying to force the ball to Rudy, or the offense was trying to force the ball to Rudy, when that maybe wasn't the thing that they should be doing. It did look a lot like what was happening early in the season last night. They need to figure out that. I mean, there have been times in the last couple of weeks where it's looked fine out there.
Right.
And actually part of that, I think you could look back and say Naz Reid helped with some of that. And unfortunately he's not available for them. But man, when it bogs down hard, and it is a tough watch.
Yes.
And that's kind of the story of this Timberwolves season, is when they're bad, they are bad in a very hard way.
Yes, exactly.
Like last night.
A couple more things, Chris Hine. One of those being, like you said, when they're bad, but they do have a habit of surprising us, of turning in a good performance when it all seems like everything's gone poorly. Let's take the kind of micro view, and then I want to go a macro view. Micro view, I do expect them to play better Wednesday, and I do think that they do have it in them to make this a series, perhaps. Still, I don't think they're going to get swept. I think they can be competitive in this next game. What do you think about that? Is this different right now than other points of resilience, or do they draw on that, and can they do that on Wednesday?
No, I expect them to play well on Wednesday. That's just been their MO throughout the season, and I think they have enough veteran leadership right now to come up with a performance on Wednesday night. That being said, I feel like Wednesday night is it for them. If they don't win Wednesday night, I sense a sweep coming.
Really? Okay.
I do. I think they're going to be putting all their chips emotionally in this series into Wednesday night. Trying to come up with this win on the road, and if it doesn't happen, I think they're in trouble.
I think I think that's fair.
But that being said, they could play well on Wednesday night, and Denver can still win this game, because I don't think Denver played to the best of their ability.
No.
The other night, and Jokic especially, did not have the kind of game that is a two-time MVP kind of numbers game. So I expect Denver to ramp it up a little bit too, now that they've gotten a game under their belts after a long layoff. They might have been a little rusty last night. They didn't shoot the ball. I mean, they shot the ball well from outside. Overall, they didn't shoot the ball especially efficiently, but they did hit a number of threes in transition.
Yes.
So the Wolves have a decision to make in terms of transition defense. How are they going to play that? Will they be crashing the offensive boards as much? They've wanted to lean into that later in the season. Or will they just be getting back as quickly as possible once the shot goes up? That'll be an interesting dynamic to see play out Wednesday night. Part of me thinks they should maybe just double down on trying to get offensive rebounds and trying to score, especially if shots aren't falling. Try to get extra shots, extra possessions, and you make that trade off. But we'll see what they do. We'll be asking tomorrow at practice, and I do expect a better effort Wednesday. I just don't know if it's going to be enough.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that if they lose Wednesday, I would see a gentleman's sweep coming where they win game 3 at home, lose game 4 at home, then get finished off in 5 back in Denver. But, to your point, though, whether it's 4 or 5, if they do lose this series in relatively easy fashion, which certainly could happen, especially like you said, if they lose Wednesday, how much do you think they will base kind of their long view of the season of the future on how close or far away they feel they are from this series? Like if they, let's say they get swept, like does that influence their offseason decision making any more than a competitive series does, or are they still in kind of information gathering mode at this point?
It's a good question. I don't know what the difference would be between a sweep and, let's say, a 6 or 7 game series. I do think that Tim Connolly and the front office is still taking a very long view of this double big partnership, and I don't think you're going to see them blow it up. It's just the vibe I get right now. It's not really like hard information or anything like that. It's just in reading through, like, Connolly's public comments and things like that, I get the sense that they're taking the long view, especially since Carl missed so much of the season,
right? That
anybody who is going to want drastic change, I don't know that that's going to be coming this season. That being said, if they get swept, something's got to change, or I don't know what that's going to look like. Or what moves you make in and around that, or maybe it's not necessarily moves, like in terms of bringing in players or personnel, but maybe it's a shift in philosophies, especially on the offensive end of the floor. Maybe it is a shift away from trying to merge Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns with a fast-paced style offense, free-flowing kind of offense, and maybe coming to some decisions on how you want to play on that end of the floor moving forward. So that could be a significant change that results from this series, I think. Not necessarily personnel, but more philosophy.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. We'll see if they are, they can't be much worse. We'll see how much better they are on Wednesday than they were on Sunday. I think a lot of the hard decisions still to make this offseason. I think they become I don't think they become clarified with any specific outcome, but I do think these games matter in a sense of, if you feel like you're that far away, even with all the things that we've talked about being kind of, things that you've got to factor in, Towns' injury, just the lack of development time and figuring all this out. I do think those things are important, but if you have a really poor performance in the playoffs, I do think that maybe accelerates your timeline for saying, hey, maybe we've got to rethink more than just, like you said, more than just the scheme or how you're going to attack it. But there's a lot of games left to play. At least 3 more. We'll see how they go. Chris, appreciate it as always. Enjoy your time in Denver, and we'll catch up with you soon.
That was good, Mike. Thank you.
Great stuff from Chris as usual. Hope you guys enjoyed all of the content today, both podcasts. If you listened to both, thank you so much. But if you only were interested in one or the other, thank you for listening to either of those as well. I'd take any feedback you have on the split up of the shows. I don't think that'll be a long-term trend. We'll see. Maybe on some days where there is so much content, but I think in the short term, it's going to have to be, because there's going to be so much Wolves and Wild in the next week or two, and there's going to be plenty of other stuff on top of it with the Twins, the NFL draft, everything going on right now, that sometimes I'm going to need to break it up just to give justice to everything that is happening right now and give things a little bit of room to breathe. So that will do it for me today. Until Wednesday, I'm Michael Rand. This is Daily Delivery. We'll see you then.